Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and guess what? Our 13th year and counting, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, if you know, energy utility rates are up. Why? Deregulation. We're going to talk a little bit about PP&L and what's going on there with utility rates. Terry Fitzpatrick will analyze. Then education funding, how important is that? Ron Cowell additionally will analyze. And guess what? It's Pennsylvania government and politics, in depth and in detail. And it starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, there's been this huge roiling debate about electric rates going up. PP&L, as 27% of its customers have gone to another energy supplier. Are rates going up? Are they going down? What's all that mean with alternative suppliers and people signing up? And next, PECO in the southeastern part of the state, their rates come off. And Terry Fitzpatrick, when do they come off? Next year?
They come off at the beginning of next year.
Now, you're wondering who this guy is. Well, he's the president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, and also, importantly, a member of the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission for 8 years. I won't
Correct.
say 8 long years, but I'm sure they were interesting years, right?
8 interesting good years, Terry.
Yeah, there you go. All right, Terry, let's talk a little bit about this. Now, explain to people why the caps came off and what that has meant to rate increases. I mean, I think everybody wants the basic understanding of why their electric rates in some places in the state have gone up. Not everywhere, may I point out. Go ahead.
Well, when the electricity competition bill was passed in 1996, caps were placed on the generation portion of your bill. Those caps were in place for a long time. It'll be 13 years, I think, or 14 years when they come off for PECO, Med-Ed, Penelec customers next year. But in that time, the world has changed. Developing countries like China and India, we're now really in a bidding contest with them for all of the commodities that go into building things and also for the fuels used in generating plants. So as a result of that, wholesale prices for electricity have gone up in the past 14 years. And because of that, when the caps come off, most customers will see an increase.
Now, let me stop you here and make sure we understand this. So for 14 years, no increases. Wholesale price of generating electricity has risen, and so now those prices are being passed along to consumers because that part of the rate hike that would have been passed along for 14 years were not. Do I have that right?
You have that exactly right, Terry.
All right, now let's go. So now the rates come off, and in a huge portion of the state served by Pennsylvania Power and Light, there have been increases upwards of some 30%, if I understand that correct. Now, what have a lot of consumers done that they are now permitted to do in terms of getting electricity from different suppliers?
Well, the whole idea of the Act was to give customers choice with regard to the supply or generation portion of their bill. And a large percentage of PPL's customers have gone to competitive suppliers and saved perhaps 10% compared to the price that PPL was charging. So that's competition working as it should. And that, given that we've only had a few months really since that cap came off, the fact that that number of customers is shopping is a really good sign of this working.
But of late, fewer people are now switching, I guess, because they've adjusted to the rate hikes, and there was this huge initial impact, and it doesn't seem like anymore, at least in the reports that I've read, that a lot of people are switching electric carriers, if that's the right, you tell me if that's the right way to put it.
Yeah, that's the right way to put it. I think it's natural that it maybe would slow down. There was a lot of publicity right at the beginning of the year. I think we'll continue to see some additional people shopping. But another thing that companies like PPL, which is the regulated utility, they're also providing a lot of options to their customers on how to conserve energy. And of course, that's very important.
Well, that is, and we don't talk, I mean, there's more emphasis on that about, using light bulbs that require less energy and using smart meters, if that's the right term for it, to make sure that the electric is leveled off and you're not using it at peak times and all of that. Far more complicated than my addled brain can handle, but you get the point. And that continued emphasis when you were on the peak, I mean, that was something that I know you all worked hard at trying to get people to understand.
That's correct. You know, one of the tough things about electricity, Terry, is everything about electricity is complicated.
Yeah.
Jurisdiction over it, how the commodity itself works, how it's priced, it's very complicated. But I think we're moving into an era now with the caps coming off. You know, I think you're seeing more conservation, and really it'll get us on a sustainable path where people are paying market prices that really reflect the conditions that exist in the market today.
Now, from your expertise, when the caps come off for PECO, and I guess they would be the largest electric supplier in the state still regulated until next year, do you expect a similar increase of up to 30% that we've seen with PPL?
Well, here's the thing, Terry. How much of an increase customers see depends on where their regulated prices were. And those prices were not the same across the state. In the southeastern part of the state, PECO's rates were higher than in some other places because they had nuclear plants that had come into their rate base back in the 1980s. So really, PECO customers are likely to see the smallest increase when those caps come off.
So that might mean that there will be less shopping around for alternative suppliers by PECO customers than we've seen with PPL.
There could be, but it depends what happens with market prices,
I understand.
Terry. And you know, markets go up and down. Wholesale market prices were up just a few years ago. They've come down 50% in just the last year because of the recession.
All right, we're talking with Terry Fitzpatrick, a former member of the PUCs, now with the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. PPL has filed for a rate increase. We're going to talk about that, and maybe we have a little bit of time. Marcellus Shale, it's a big deal. Huge natural gas formation runs across 2/3 of the state of Pennsylvania. We'll be back with that and more following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionjobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionjobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back with Terry Fitzpatrick, who's the President and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We're talking about this very important subject of rate caps off, energy price, electric anyway, up, and its importance to you. Boy, you get that electric bill. For some people, it was a shock. Many folks have shopped around. We just talked about that. You know, make this clear, this difference between generating electricity and then it gets passed along directly to the homes through the electric power lines and all that. What the hell does all that mean? Help us out here.
Like I said, everything about electricity is complicated. The generation portion of the business is competitive now. Electric utilities like PPL or PECO, they now go out into the wholesale market and buy electricity because they no longer own power plants. And they pass that price, that wholesale price, along to customers who choose not to shop.
That's one point.
That's correct.
And then it gets to the home. How does it get there?
It gets there through the transmission lines and also through substations and through the electric distribution system, through the wires you see going down your street.
And that's a charge. I mean, the cost of operating and maintaining and transmitting is another charge.
That's exactly right. And
so there's two deals going on.
Yes, there is. And what we saw at the beginning of the year, for example, for PP&L was they passed along the wholesale price for electricity itself. But they have a rate increase pending before the PUC now because they also have to keep up that system of their poles and their wires, and they have to make sure that that infrastructure is being maintained.
That's the second part of it.
Correct.
And that's unregulated.
No,
that's regulated because they have. Go ahead.
That's exactly correct. That's regulated. That has to go through the PUC's rate-making process with other parties before some increase is approved.
Now, they have a rate hike increase before the PUC.
Correct.
Is that process likely to be determined in a short time, long time? I mean, about how long?
It's about a 9-month process, and I think they filed it about a month ago, so it'll be sometime later this year.
Do you have any idea what that would mean to the average user if they got what they've asked for, what the rate hike would be?
Well, it depends what comes through the Commission's process.
Okay.
We're not talking about 30%, which is the amount that customers saw their bills go up if they didn't
in
shop
January,
because of the supply portion of
right.
the bill. It's less than that. So, you know, it will go through the Commission's process, and it'll probably be less than was filed for. But the key point here is these utilities need to keep up their infrastructure.
Right.
They need to keep up the wires and the poles, because if not, the quality of our service will deteriorate.
Good point.
And we have problems with infrastructure across the board in our society. We can't allow that to happen with electricity or with natural gas.
All right, before you go, I want to talk a little bit about this huge roiling debate over Marcellus Shale, this natural gas formation. 2/3 of our state, we have enough natural gas to supply the country, some estimates are, for 50 years.
Right.
There's a big debate about taxing it and how much it should be taxed, and we've done programs on that. This is very important. States looking ahead to the income generated from the tax to support a lot of some of the state's activities. From your perspective, where do you see that debate going?
Well, let me say that supplies of natural gas are very important to both electric and gas utilities. It's important to gas utilities, obviously, because it's more supply for them to pass along to their customers, and if we have that right in our backyard, it can help to keep gas prices down. It's also important for electricity, because a lot of generating plants that are being built now use natural gas as a fuel. So having this kind of a resource right in our own backyard, it really overall is very good news for Pennsylvania and for our future.
Well, yeah, we're a huge energy-producing state, and the question has always become in these energy-producing states, how do you produce this energy but yet preserve the environment? I mean, and that's a natural tug. The way you extract that natural gas through a deep well-dwelling process does produce contaminated water, and there's a big debate, as you know, because you follow this closely, in the legislature over all that, and then whether or not, you know, the drilling should take place on state lands. Some state lands are now in use, and it looks like the governor is not going to permit any additional state lands, at least while he's governor. But do you think in the long haul that there is a modest or a small future for natural gas production in our state, given all that I've just said, over time?
I think it's going to be a very big thing for Pennsylvania, and I think you can see indications of that through the amount that's being invested here, both in the northern part of the state and western part of the state where this runs. Also here in Harrisburg, Terry, if you look and you can see how these companies are hiring people to work things through the regulatory political process in Harrisburg, you know this is a very big deal for our state.
All right, great update. We just got electric understanding of how energy is produced for dummies, Dummies 101. Great job.
Thanks,
all right,
Terry.
Ron Cowell is here. Education funding. Education, what, 40% of the state's budget? How important is that to you? Ron Cowell will tell you, and we'll be back following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Joining me is Ron Cowell. He's president of the Education Policy and Leadership Center. Now, hold on, full disclosure time. I'm on Ron's board, active in education. Professor, what do you expect? Ron Cowell, welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right, let's talk a little bit about education. Is it 40% of the state budget, roughly?
Yeah, good ballpark figure. Yeah.
In the ballpark. Oh, so it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And as you know, good, solid education is inextricably linked to success economically. How many times have we said that? But let's talk a little bit now about moving forward with the education budget of the state. The governor last year kept to his promise to increase spending in education. The legislature went along with it. It's called the Costing Out Study. Looking forward, what do you anticipate will be the state's education spending when it comes to, let's talk about basic education, elementary and middle school and high school education.
Well, the Costing Out study that was reported, mandated by the General Assembly and then reported in 2007, and finally implemented in terms of a new plan in 08, beginning in 08, said that we had a $4.5 billion gap across 500 school districts in terms of what was available to school districts versus what kids need when you count the kids and you consider extraordinary circumstances like special ed and English as second language, etc.
And some of these are mandated. I mean, the programs are mandated by state government that local school districts carry out, right?
Sure, and most importantly, it is a state policy that says that all kids are going to become proficient relative to the academic standards. And that was the question for the Costing Out study. What's it going to take to give every kid a reasonable chance to become proficient in what the state says it ought to become proficient in, the stuff we value that's important to citizenship, that's important to the workforce in this state. So, $4.5 billion gap. The governor made a proposal. Over 6 years, wanted to increase state spending by $2.6 billion. So it says some local money is needed as well. The legislature began to address that in 08, took a step forward with $275 million. But last year, on the one hand, took a step backwards for the first time ever, reduced the state appropriation for the school districts by $354 million.
That's sort of generically, that would be their general appropriation.
No, their basic subsidy.
That's what
correct.
I mean, their general appropriation.
Now, fortunately, the federal subsidy money was available, and so the legislature, with the governor's support, used $354 million of that to backfill.
The stimulus money.
Correct, to backfill or to replace the state money, and then used another $300 million to keep this plan moving forward. So the governor's now come in with a proposal for this third year, 10-11, and said, let's at least restore the state cut. Let's add $354 million, which gets us back to where the state appropriation was a couple years ago.
And if the stimulus money goes away and they don't do that, there'd be the hole, correct?
We would be sending less money to school districts than we did a couple years ago, correct.
Yeah. Now, look, one of the big debates, and you chaired the House Education Committee for a number of years, so you're intimately aware of this. Back in the 50s and 60s, the state's share was actually 51%. I went back and looked at this.
54% in 1974.
Was that the highest point?
Yep.
And so now it's what, 37, 38?
35%.
Okay, let's say 35%. And so what's happened is that the state has, in a sense, penalized, that's a tough word maybe, the school districts by putting more pressure on them, and the property tax, because their share of the cost has diminished. At the same time, they've mandated that the school districts do more things. Am I wrong about that?
You're correct. We've increased expectations for kids in particular. We've said this stuff is valuable, these standards, this performance, and it's valuable and important for every kid.
Yeah.
So we've said that first. So we have expectations that never existed before. Secondly, compared to other states, Pennsylvania has ranked in the bottom 5 in terms of the percentage of the cost paid for by the state. In terms of state government appropriations per kid, we're below the national average, below every one of our contiguous states.
Yep.
So, as a result, we are excessively dependent on property taxes in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
When the state is stingy about providing money, local taxpayers pay more.
Yep. And by the way, we're going to break. We'll come back. But at the same time, they're using one of the most unfair ways to raise money, the property tax system, as opposed to some fair systems that might be used alternatively. Yes or no?
Local school districts are very dependent on property taxes.
That's my point.
Yep.
All right, we'll be back with Ron Cowell following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, welcome back with Ron Cowell. We're talking about education. 40% of the state's budget and a lot of your property taxes go into it. All right, Ron, let's talk a little bit about, we've talked about sort of what we call basic ed. We've not talked about early education or higher education. Where does that stand going forward?
Well, we talked about the basic ed subsidy. There are lots of other line items that drive money to school districts. Many of them have been cut. For this coming budget, the governor has proposed some tiny cuts for early education, going in the wrong direction though. No increase for higher education. Libraries are cut again. So if you consider education in a broad sense, last year it was generally bad for education, although there was an increase for basic subsidy. We are more dependent on federal stimulus dollars now.
That can't be good because that's going to go away.
Money's going away.
That's going away.
And when the state appropriation of state dollars is decreasing, and the federal stimulus money that has saved us a little bit is going to go away, there's going to be a major funding crisis that ultimately is going to affect kids' tuition. It's going to affect local property taxes. When the state doesn't appropriate dollars for higher ed or for K-12, student tuition goes up and property taxes go up.
You know what it sounds like? A compelling case for sort of redoing what we can't been able to do is to redo this general basic tax structure at the top, the state, income tax and sales tax, in order to relieve the property tax, which would be a more efficient way. Now, I know that's controversial, but it's certainly been proposed by how many folks have talked about this over the years?
Well, a lot of times. The governor has asked the legislature to do something that institutionally it usually doesn't do, and that is plan ahead. He has said you can pass the budget that he has proposed without any tax changes. But he's asked the legislature, in its own interest, not his, to consider some changes in terms of corporate taxes, sales taxes, etc. Because the legislature, in 2 or 3 years, is going to have to deal with the loss of stimulus money and then this major pension crisis.
All right, let's go to the prospects for moving ahead. We're going to have a new governor and a new legislature, and who knows what ultimately will happen. But what would, if you had, you could sit down with the new governor, what would you tell him he ought to do?
I would say to the new governor that we need to continue to change the culture of funding schools in Pennsylvania that Governor Rendell has started. We need to quit funding schools on the basis of how convenient it is for the legislature or how politically easy it is, and instead fund them on the basis of the needs of kids in light of these academic expectations that we now have as a matter of state policy for all school children across the state. That's what ought to drive the state appropriation, not whether it's politically easy or popular.
Well, given that context, we're in a recession. The economy's not likely to get any better. There's no appetite to raise taxes. I mean, this is going to be a tough next couple of years. I mean, I don't think there's any way around that unless somebody makes some huge commitment to the future. And as you know, legislators look often just to this year, this budget.
Well, that goes back to the point of changing the culture. This is not about whether you get elected next year. It's not about whether it's easy or even popular. We've said as a matter of state policy that these academic standards are very, very important for the well-being of the Commonwealth and that all kids need to perform. If we're serious about that, then we need to make sure the educational opportunities are there. If we're not serious and the legislature can't stand up and the governor can't lead in terms of assuring appropriate resources, then they probably need to rethink the academic standards and how important they are.
Great update. And as always, thanks for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Stay well.